Chapter 6. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a woods. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Robert Frost. One day, a battalion of angels met together to discuss the events of the world. Dressed in linen, they wore belts of the finest gold around their waists. Their bodies resembled translucent chrysolite. Their eyes glistened with a fiery light from the altars of God. Muscular arms and legs gleamed like burnished bronze. Towering 7 to 15 feet tall and were as wide as 4 or 5 of the biggest linebackers on any NFL team. Their faces were distinctive, as though carefully chiseled. Flowing hair framed their faces. They looked to be about 30 years old in human age. It appeared the largest of them had a 30-foot wingspan. Their massive power made it evident that no demonic force would want to fight. Just one of them could destroy an entire army. These angelic beings were the armies of God. They were standing right where they had been positioned by God when He first created them for His purposes. They would leave their post to come down to fight battles for men. Then they would come back to wait until they were needed again. Some had swords, and some did not. The swords they carried were flames of fire. The ground shook as they walked. Carrying huge shields, a broad piece of armor which was carried on their left arm was a defense from demonic blows. These were supernatural weapons. Some of them could speak words and cause whole nations to crumble and fall into the sea. They were armed, some with words, some with swords, some with spears that had special purposes, but all had the power of God. They knew their jobs, highly specialized jobs. Nobody had to tell them how to do their work. God just told them where to go. Some of them were clothed with the power to move the earth. Others were clothed with power to bring judgment. They all had power to defend and keep God's children. Their words, clothed with power, were ready at any time to come and do battle against the powers of Satan. They were released to fight the moment men would pray to the Father in the name of Jesus. Oh, the power of God that is there and available for man, if only they could discern the value of angels. Satan slowly paced along the back of the battalion, having transformed himself into an angel of light. His arms and legs resembled polished, precious stones, and his face had a flickering glow. Sinister and diabolical as ever, he hoped to remain unnoticed. Satan was most effective when he was not acknowledged or believed in. It is almost impossible to defeat an enemy that you refuse to admit exists. That is why Joe and Grace had become such easy prey. Michael, whose countenance was like lightning and his garments white as snow, spotted Satan and cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roared, "Where have you come from?" Satan hated Michael. Satan realized there would be a final war in heaven, one in which Michael and his angels would cast him out of heaven for all time. Reluctantly, he answered, "I have been wandering around the world, going back and forth across it. I never hear anyone say anything good about God. Everyone is complaining and griping about how awful life is. I hear everyone whine at least 15 to 30 times a day. As much as you try to tell me that everyone loves God, the truth is that everyone is guilty of being a complainer with little respect for their master." Michael responded, "Have you noticed Joe? There is no other man like him. He is chaste and honest. Everything he does turns to gold. He continually sings praises to God. God thinks highly of him." "Why shouldn't Joe love him? God gives him his heart's desires," Satan retorted. "Haven't God's blessings protected Joe's family and his businesses? He has made him prosperous in every endeavor. But if you would let me destroy everything he has, surely he would curse God to his face. If you will only let me test Joe, I will expose him and all the so-called righteous people for the frauds they are." A weird, muffled laugh escaped as he tried to hide his excitement. It was not as though Satan hadn't been working on Joe for years, but this new plan could bring the job to completion. Satan expected, with one crafty blow, to assault God's beloved and make him a fool. He would alienate humans and destroy their faith in their Creator. His all-consuming passion was to drive an irremovable wedge between them. Who could love a deity that caused bad things to happen to them? Only a fool would. Incapable of contending with Yahweh, the God of the covenant, power pitted against power, Satan was bent on destroying Joe by opening the doors of hell with uncontrollable strife and fear. Then he was sure that Joe would want nothing more than to curse God. How could Joe continue to love God if he saw how unjust he was, punishing those who did not deserve it? Satan was thrilled that humans blamed everything on God. No one liked to think that evil might be lurking just around the corner. Chuckling, he said, "I'm so grateful everyone would rather blame Mother Nature or fate for the evil in the world. It's even better when they blame God. People are so stupid, fearful, and weak." The celestial challenge that came on fiery words of hate once raised could not be ignored. Michael said to Satan, "Very well, then. You know the terms of the covenant. You can influence everything he has, but do not lay a finger on Joe." Joe's fear had breached a hole in God's protective hedge. He continually said things like, "This just kills me. I'm afraid something bad will happen to my children. I'm scared to death. That just blows me away." He had no idea the impact of his words. He was saying what he felt, unfiltered in the stress of the moment. When one lives long enough, quite often, it becomes easy to sing the blues, a song that tells how it is on a bad day. Faith just vanishes. Joe felt better momentarily when he said these cliches. Undeniably, it was tempting to Joe, almost a reflex now, to spit out an always or a never. You never come home when you were supposed to, and we are worried you're up to something no good. You always forget to call when you are running late, so we sit home and worry. Joe was offended that his children weren't living by the few rules he placed on them. He hadn't expected them to be perfect, but how hard was it to be home on time? The problem with this was that he was giving labels to his children that would stick for life. His kids were becoming what he said they were, so telling them that they always forgot to call made them more likely to be the kid who, you guessed it, who never called. Too bad he didn't understand the impact of his words. The mood of the gathering shifted and became somber. Everyone continued to look at Michael with the same serious expression, driving the gravity of the situation home. "We can't fight or even offer any resistance if Joe uses the covenant principles incorrectly. How will we turn this around? It doesn't look like any of his friends are any wiser. I wish they would just believe what God says. Why do they always find ways to water it down, dilute it, until it is ineffective? They have even been warned to study and seek the truth. The problem is that Joe never took it upon himself to learn anything but intellectual knowledge. He lacks God's wisdom. That's what makes this situation so difficult. Without God's miraculous intervention, things will be taxing." Thinking to himself, Gabriel pondered, "Why can't Joe just believe the truth?" Michael deduced, "We will have to wait until Joe understands and uses the weapons God has provided." Standing with Michael were the chief princes. Their names embodied their character. They have power. They defined them. They're more than a bunch of letters grouped together to sound pleasant to the ear. Names are a gift given to them from God. Raphael, whose name means God has healed, was often dispatched by God to answer Joe's prayers. He had a deep, strong voice, and the sight of him brought terror to the eyes of the enemy. Alongside them were Gabriel, whose name means God is my strength. Not surprising that he has a piercing war cry and fierce countenance. With one war cry, he can often send demons flying. Joel, whose name means determined, watches over the mighty domain of the wind and the waves. Nigel, the determined one, has the ability to take fiery blows and shield many from Satan's turbulent, wordy attacks. And Lionel, the lion, was sent to bring assistance and security to Grace. How poignant it was to see them stand at rest, acquiescing to this peculiar command. There was an eerie grimness in their eyes. Everyone sensed the ominous effect of the appalling news. There would be no skirmishes or confrontations. They would no longer be the aggressors, but rather the guardians sent to see that Joe himself was not harmed. Michael and his assistant Manuel immediately left for their positions silently, without saying a word. Joe remained secure. Joe was to be protected from any direct onslaught. Tonight they would stand by and keep watch, but aside from that, do nothing. With similar qualities to men, the angels were used to wielding swords and waging verbal combat. They had feelings, passions, and desires. They had minds to think with and the ability to communicate. Yet they were not natural beings. They were supernatural. Even the strongest of natural creatures needs sleep and rest, but angels do not. When they run, they have the appearance of a flash of lightning. Even though they have appeared visibly and interacted with men on several occasions, this time it seemed these ministering spirits would remain unseen to the material world.